And opinions you are about to hear are of the hosts and do not reflect the management of CaveRadioBroadcasting.com.
Good afternoon. It's Thursday, June 23rd. You are listening to Down the Rabbit Hole, a Gen Pop Media production. So we have a full crew in here today. I got Hooper's back from the injured list. We have brought him up from the injured list, and he's back.
I'm off IR.
So welcome back, Hoops.
Thank you.
We missed you. Catherine is gracious with her presence. Always a pleasure.
Grace is a good word for her
Always a blessing to be here.
And diagonally across from me, in the right corner of your radio, which is Mr. DiBiase. How you doing, Dave?
Doing fantastic.
Awesome. We got Kenny on the board.
Selling out.
And we brought someone to play in the sandbox with us today. We'd like to welcome Troy to Down the Rabbit Hole for the first time.
Woo.
What's up, Troy?
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Pleasure to be here.
We are happy to have you.
Is Troy's mic
I didn't
on?
know we had sound effects. That's cool.
Yeah, Kenny put
Do I
them
need to
on
be
last
closer?
week.
Yeah,
Kenny, that's
you
awesome.
almost need to be like
On top of it.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
going
almost where
down
it's-
on it.
Yeah, almost uncomfortable.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So,
all the off-color jokes, we cut those out before we put this.
That's okay,
online,
man.
So.
I think it's
Yeah.
cool. We're
Oh,
using.
so we should just make more off-color jokes,
I
and then
think
you'll have
we-
less
That way
editing
you'll
to
get
do.
it into the show.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, because this whole section, I can just cut it out and what? Because
Well, if you
nothing
leave-
important's been talked about here so far. So that's
If
1
you
minute.
leave Dave and I alone too long, it'll end up being a 10-minute show
It might.
because it'll be all off-color.
Yeah, we're using almost every mic in here today.
Yeah, what's up?
It's awesome.
We're gonna have to. Well, hopefully John or Jeff will stop by and take up that lonely mic.
Yeah.
It's looking
Yeah,
lonely
I'm
over
meeting
there.
with John later today. Apparently.
Awesome. So so we're gonna go over a few things today. But as always, we are sponsored in no small part by Elder Care. If you or your loved ones need a little extra care at home or in an assisted living facility, give the girls at Elder Care a call. You can reach them at eldercarecares.com or give them a call at what's the number, Dave?
For elder care.
Yeah.
911.
911.
I always
Just call 911.
I always end up giving out
It
my
is for
home
older
number.
people, right?
That's who I'm talking to when I call 911.
734-671-6518, and the ladies there, they'll take care of you.
Oh, you're not kidding. You're not kidding. They're awesome.
How do you know?
How do I know?
I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
I got some adult diapers and all.
He works with them. No, actually, that one's going to stay in.
Yeah.
It's because we know Dave and we know that
Sweet. No, I have personally talked to both Chriselle and Linda. I know them by name, and they are wonderful ladies.
Yeah, they're like the,
I will
the
testify.
believe
kingpins
it.
of the company.
I
They're
do.
good people.
I was
There's
just
no
kidding.
doubt about
I was
it.
just teasing
In fact,
Dave.
they're great. They're great. I love them.
And, ink on paper, printing.com. So if you need anything printed, that's what they do.
And by
Shout
the way,
out.
if you want me to put up something more than ink on paper printing,
Oh, you're gonna need that logo?
I don't need
Maybe-
it. It's do you want to
maybe
give it to
maybe
me?
I'll
I'm
go
not.
on Fiverr and see if I can find a graphic artist.
Do you know any good ones?
I know one.
Good ones?
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah.
I can give you some stuff in Photoshop. I'd like to give shout-outs. We have forgotten shout-outs a little bit. We've been going off script lately, but always to our good friends at I Am the Voice of Truth.
Face of truth.
Face of Truth. Oh, wow. I need my script. I'm so sorry. I'm thefaceoftruth.com. The work they do over there is incredible, and they've been very supportive of us and our efforts, and we really appreciate it. And Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. That's AE911truth.org. And to the original truther himself, Jesus Christ. So on Down the Rabbit Hole today, we're going to go over a few things. We wanted to do some talk about genes and genetic testing, and that's going
Not
to...
Levi
Yeah, I thought
Strauss.
you were talking about.
Yeah.
We're going to
Well,
talk about fashion.
We're talking
Sweet.
about Wrangler jeans.
jeans with
today.
a
I was say I got some Wranglers on.
Yeah, genes and the genetic
Genetics,
sense.
DNA,
Yeah, more-
creation,
Yeah.
evolution,
Yeah, so we're going
heavy duty
We're
subjects.
going to get into that. This is something we've been wanting to get into, and we had an opportunity. So we invited a friend down to sit in and share his opinion with us.
But we should ask or talk about why specifically we asked Troy to come on the show.
I thought it was my sparkling personality.
Well,
he's your
that
friend.
was it for
always,
me.
Always that. But, I mean, it's no secret. Troy does not believe in God. So he believes in evolution as opposed to a young earth theory. And so he has been extremely gracious to come on this show. And I mean, it looks like it's 4 against 1, but
No, that's
just
not
having
how
a
it works.
conversation here, you know.
Yeah,
That's
we
the way
actually-
it works, because a couple of years ago we'd be hanging out with him, and it would be the 4 of us against you.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
But we
That's
were just
exactly
next door
right.
at the bar, and actually we'd agree on most everything. So I could totally kick it with Troy. So
Well, there we go.
regardless if he thinks we used to be monkeys or not.
Yeah, I'm glad you guys brought that up because this we're here to find the truth, not to just win an argument that we happen to be
Amen.
on the side of. I think most of us in this room have been on
The other
both
side.
sides of this
Absolutely.
at one point because I certainly
Absolutely.
believed evolution. I even debated and fought on behalf of
Yeah,
it.
you and me both.
And it was in the course of looking for information to strengthen my own arguments that I started to find some cracks, which would later manifest into this complete shift and world change. But some things that were very shocking that I discovered. So, Troy, thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's
Glad to be
awesome
here.
he came.
Yeah, that's great.
Because I mean, it really, in all fairness, not knowing, well, you don't know any of us, do you, except for Kat.
No,
Just
he
Kat.
just knows Cat.
So you could have been walking into a hornet's nest. You
Oh,
don't
yeah.
know. So it's actually really courageous that you came here. And
Well, thanks.
well, that
Luckily,
shows that
we're all
that he
cool,
at least
so-
has faith
And
in
he-
Cat's judgment.
Well, we've been like best friends for years, like over 25 years, and he knows
How
I'm
did
not gonna,
I not meet him? I mean,
he knows that I'm not going to. He replaced you.
Oh,
I met Howard
Damn.
when I was 15,
I was like
and
Howard
then
2.0.
yeah, he was Howard
Meet the-
2.0.
Hey, Howard, meet
I've
the
come
new
to that
Howard.
conclusion. I'm not kidding you. I have absolutely come to
Well,
that
she's
conclusion.
told. I mean, in the conversations she's had,
weird.
leading up to this, because she's wanted to hook us up. My life is so chaotic. There's very little time, and it's like she'll tell me, well, Troy's like this and Troy, and I'm just like, wow. So I think we're going to be just fine because everything she says to me about your personality and the way you look at things, it seems like we have a very similar point of view on a whole lot of
Yeah,
things.
I think so.
Troy, do you want to give us a quick few paragraph resume, intro, whatever what's
Like, who
how
I
did
am
you
or-
get here philosophically? Yeah, who you are, what you do,
Philosophically.
that kind, all that.
Yeah, who you are, what you believe, and how you came to believe
Yeah,
what you
I mean,
do.
I'm
and what
I'm-
your faith background was, if any.
Yeah, well, my faith background was mostly very uninterested in religion or anything parents. So not really heavy amounts. I unfortunately have always been a scientist, computer geek my entire life. Basically, I'm from that generation that invented the computer geek back in the 80s and things like that. I'm a computer systems engineer. I design software for large-scale companies, things like that. So most of my whole life has been dedicated to math, logic, things like that. I did get in heavily, I think, when I was younger, looking at a lot of different religions from different perspectives, kind of doing that same thing everybody does, where they look for, hey, how is the world working and things like
Right.
that.
How old were you when you read the Bible?
I started that when I was like 12. When I was 12, and again, not really through prompting from any relatives. It was more of kind of a personal thing. You hear a lot of information, and this is back in the dark ages when there's no internet. You can't readily search anything. So you start researching things. And what I had done was decide, hey, Christianity is this big thing. I'm going to read the Bible. And I kind of read it cover to cover when I was 12, went through it all, and took a lot away from it. And I think later on, as my love of science kind of evolved, a lot of Christianity, I think, I guess what's the way of saying it? It's I don't really have a problem with people being Christian. I guess there's a lot of things about atheists where some people are like, oh, they want to fight you about being Christian. And personally, my personal worldview has always been, I think if you have a belief system that's working for you and it's making your life better and it's making your family's life better, that's fantastic. I don't want to argue with you about that. I think if that's your worldview, that's a great worldview. My worldview has always been related to the fact that I kind of look at science and I look at all of the things that are available information-wise, and I say, okay, given everything that I know, this is kind of what I think. Now, that doesn't mean I'm closed off to any new interpretations, new information, anything people have to offer. And it also doesn't mean I have a viewpoint that's necessarily incompatible with people who are Christians. This is something Catherine and I talk about a lot, where it's like, a lot of our shared belief systems are the same, just coming from different points.
You even told me at one point that you're down with Christianity as far as like the teachings of Christ, but it's the supernatural element of it that you can't square
it's
away.
the creationist aspect. It's how the universe works. And that's not necessarily saying that that's wrong. It's just I don't feel that a lot of the popular interpretations of the Bible with regards to, not believing in evolution, not believing in things like that, are not right. But I also don't think the fact that I believe in evolution necessarily discounts the fact that the Bible may be right if you look at it in a different way, if you look at the interpretations of it.
Well, you could subscribe to what's called the gap theory, which, the first sentence of Genesis of the Bible is, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And right there you've got the formation of time, you've got the formation of matter,
right, and
the space that we're in. Some people put a period right after that and continue. I say some people. Some interpretations of the original text have a period there, and the next sentence is, then the earth became formless and void. Now, what happened after that period and when the earth became formless and void, I spent a lot of time in there also. From the day that I realized there really is a God, which was only 5 years ago for me, immediately I started to try and reconcile, okay, there's a God, but I know evolution's true, so maybe God's just guiding our evolution, or maybe there's maybe there really is 12 billion years in that pre-Adamic age after God created the world, right before the world became formless and void. I had the same issues because I'm a researcher scientist by nature. I'm a numbers guy. And a lot of these things I had a hard time reconciling. I mean, that's just... And when I started to go back in, because some of the things like you brought up, I felt the same way. Like, okay, really? Adam and Eve, God created us and put Adam and Eve here. You read a few more chapters into Genesis, now you're talking about angels mated with humans, and they created these massive creatures. Really? Well, I've never seen one. Where are they? That's more BS. God then decides to flood the world. How do you flood the whole world at the same time? Where does the water come from? A lot of these questions, which, I now realize, or I believe that a lot of them are very, very carefully introduced into our lives at an early age through our education system that actually that are actually foundationally very weak. Now, we throw the word science around a lot as if it's fact, but there are a lot of scientists out there that have, in a lot of senses, a crazier belief system than some of the things that we can prove. I have a feeling we're going to broach some of that today. But it sounds like you had some of the same issues like I did, which is in the beginning. I'm like, okay, how can evolution be true? And the Bible
and coincide at the same time. And I think that's where, when I started getting into going down some of those crazier paths of science, things like when you get into time displacements, whenever there's that kind of young Earth argument, I'm always kind of vehemently opposed to it, because if we're going to count solar days, there's just so much overwhelming scientific evidence that says the Earth is X number of years old. But that's not saying, that doesn't again discount necessarily if you start looking at things when you realize that time can move faster and slower based on gravitational effects, based on speed. As you approach the speed of light, time actually slows down for you. So it could be a day for you, could be millions of years as you approach a certain speed. You can start kind of tying in a lot of science still that makes a lot of these things work. And I kind of associate it towards kind of the old viewpoint of that, the geocentric view that kind of got Galileo and Copernicus in trouble back in the days of yore, about how this is what the church says and what you're saying is wrong. And when you look back at, it's really just the interpretations of those passages in the Bible that were kind of in error, as opposed to the fact that it's a heliocentric, we revolve around the sun, things like that. That doesn't disprove the Bible necessarily. It just disproves a certain interpretation of the Bible. And that's kind of how I look at a lot of things, where, is there a way to make this still work with all the scientific viewpoints? And I think there is, and I think really I end up kind of railing more against hardline viewpoints that discount science, as opposed to just saying, "Oh, well, wait, Christianity."
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I'm really no different than you were when I came up. Now my my belief system.
Did you just say came out?
Came up.
Oh, okay.
How long?
said
came
out.
When I
oh wow, that's
I
news. Let's talk about that.
When I came out of the Christian closet, but I wasn't really any different than you, because I have a very logical mind. Now, I'm not going to say that I'm a scientist or a researcher in that respect. I'm just someone. I do believe in math. I'm a big math guy. So I get it from that perspective. Excuse me. And it's all about logic. And there were a lot of things that didn't logically make sense to me. Therefore, I couldn't solve those riddles. But the one thing I'm going to say before I hand off and we get into this, I am the one person out of the five of us here that...
1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah.
Yeah, just counting real quick. Just
Math
counting real
guy.
quick. Yeah, math guy.
I guess
Joe,
Kenny didn't get counted in this one. Sorry.
That I never bought. I have never bought evolution, ever. I don't have an alternate theory. I did not have an alternate theory until I started believing. I started seeing so many things from the Bible being true that I just don't bother thinking it's not true anymore. But I never bought evolution. Evolution's never worked for me. I could know, just like I had issues with faith and the logic that you have to be willing to, the way you look at things with faith, I had exactly the same problem with evolution. It doesn't logically make sense to me.
Yeah, I have one question, and it seems to be there's maybe in my mind, there's maybe a confusion. Does the creation standpoint necessarily indicate young Earth? Because for me, it does not.
Not necessarily.
Because I don't see anything that dictates how
Yeah,
old the Earth is.
That's like one side of the argument.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not necessarily saying that your Earth is
Right.
young.
I think what...
Mankind, however, is a different story. But
Oh, I see. So you're saying the Earth could have been around for billions
doesn't
of years.
I don't
but
think that he
man-
actually chose to tell us how old the Earth is.
Okay. So, but you're not saying man is billions of years old.
No, that's clearly not the case. But I don't know that young Earth theory is the same as saying
Yeah, let's try not to
Interesting.
confuse
I never
them.
thought about
it's
that.
going to.
And that's just in my. I mean, maybe
We're going to be talking, I'm guessing, about the fossil record and the geologic time scale, because they have a very
Sure.
important relationship to each other. And so that we're going to
Yeah.
broach that a little bit. Just to frame this, so we understand what we're talking about. When I think of evolution, for me, the definition of evolution is a change in the DNA pool of a species.
agreed.
Okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Wait, we got to make sure he agrees with that too.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, the aspect is over time, the basically is the separation of the gene pool and it modifying over time.
Okay. Now, there are, under the umbrella of evolution, there are two types of evolution that are acknowledged. What is commonly called microevolution, which is within a species adapting, changes happening inside of a DNA pool to adapt it to its existing current environment. Then there is macroevolution, which states, like if you go back in time far enough, states that we came from a combination of rocks and rain, and somehow life came to be from that as a mutation of nature. And that in there is implied also that if you follow our genetic pool or line back far enough, we are the ancestors of everything from plants to bananas to apes, as we get closer to. So are we all in agreement that these two types of evolutions are distinct?
Yeah.
Because I don't think, does anyone here disagree with microevolution?
No, 'cause I think actually attaching evolution to that confuses the matter.
It does, and I've often seen microevolution as proof for macro.
Right. Now there's like speciating, right? Like
Sure.
where right?
You can have a dog that can be a little poodle, or it can be a German Shepherd.
Used to be wolves.
But a dog,
You
I think our argument is going to be that a dog cannot morph into a gorilla or
Right.
over time.
a whale or something.
Or something.
Right.
Okay. So we're really going to be today talking about macro evolution, because I think that is where that's really where the debate lies. In scientific circles, it does not exist with micro evolution. That I think we've all seen evidence of it. So we're talking about things that are happening now. We're talking about the beginning of time, how we got here. So what are the possibilities? Right now, what are the possibilities of how we got here? I mean, God created us. That's one possibility. We evolved from
Big Bang.
Tadpoles.
Well, the Big Bang's more about the universe.
Yeah, Big Bang's about.
Well,
That's getting
the-
into cosmology as opposed to evolution.
Yeah,
So-
there's
very similar theory to the evolution of man is the Big Bang, which is nothing
Right.
exploded into something.
something.
right.
Right.
Whereas in humanity, again,
Right.
nothing became something.
Right.
Yeah, there's panspermia.
So we either evolved, we were dropped here, or we were made by God. Is there a third
There's
possibility?
panspermia is
What's
also
that?
That's like aliens seeded the.
Yeah.
you know.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's a
where
s-
did it start? Yeah.
That's a
That's
sub chapter of so if the aliens made us, where did the aliens come
Okay,
from?
I mean, yeah.
Did they have? At some point, that argument, you still have the same question, which is, did God make aliens, or
Right.
did they evolve themselves? So, are there any other viewpoints that maybe I've missed other than those two?
Did we cover just kind of primordial soup, singular cellular life?
So
the
that's
starting point.
That's
Well,
kind of
that's where the story's going to begin there, because we're going to have to get from this primordial soup
Right.
to a
To where we're
creature
at
with
now.
symbiotic systems that rely on each other
Right.
for existence. And we're going to have to talk about how that went from this soup of rocks and rain into something that eventually painted the Sistine Chapel. Because an evolutionist argument in a lot of ways is that if you wait long enough, two rocks will eventually create the Sistine Chapel. It might take a few billion years, but
right.
it would happen eventually.
Right.
An evolutionist, believe me, and I used to argue this. If you walk away from your garage that's a mess, and could do this let's say to speed up the experiment, do this with 1 billion garages on Earth. One of them should begin to organize itself into a working Mercedes-Benz or a working automobile.
Not.
You don't think that's what that's
That's not really the argument. Well, I guess I've seen that parable before, and one of the things about when you look at kind of that primordial soup thing is guessing the starting conditions. What was the starting conditions? What were the chemicals? What were the components at a specific time with a specific atmosphere of the Earth? All of those things somehow started this. Now we've done some things in science where we've created the molecules that kind of started those things. We've created RNA chains, which is like one of the building blocks, I guess, of life.
you think we created RNA?
No, well, we have. We've
We've
created
discovered-
RNA molecule. Well, no,
we've
we've
dis-
actually created RNA molecule chains. We have not created life. That has not happened yet. But
Well,
we have
that's-
created the building blocks of
Yeah,
life
pieces
so
of
far.
it.
There
in
have
a
been,
lab.
without a doubt, thousands of experiments that have tried to. It's
Recreate
really
that
what the
starting
movie
point.
Frankenstein covered is to
Right.
spark life into something.
Right, but to
We-
kind of say it can evolve anywhere is not necessarily the position. It's
oversimplifying
we think,
a bit.
Yeah, we think there was a certain starting condition that could have caused it, and if that spark happened, then how did we get from there? Science doesn't know that yet.
Right.
Right now, that's still a big question. We've created some of the building blocks of life, but we've never recreated, hey, we're going to take a bunch of chemicals and create life.
So the building blocks, there's 4 amino acids. I mean,
Yep.
that is what these have to come together.
Yep.
And they have to do it in a specific order or the whole system collapses. And I'm going to be drawing on your experience as a systems engineer. We're going to be talking about that in a minute. So way back at the beginning of time, if you believe in and it's the theory of evolution still, Darwin, who he's not the guy I would trust the most anymore. I was actually doing research on him.
Yeah.
He's a bloodline Freemasonic member. His father, children still are. That I think gives you access to.
And his theory's been improved upon a lot. I mean, it's not. Nobody's still going off of original Darwinism as.
Well, you know, that's one thing.
Natural selection is the sole method.
This is one thing because I went looking for scientists that are out there today saying evolution is true. Now, I found Richard Dawkins. He's quite famous for it, the God delusion. But in scholarly scientific circles, I can't find anybody.
Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Okay. Our buddy.
Yeah.
Our buddy Neil.
Yeah.
All over the news. Why is it the one guy that is out there spouting that gets the airplay? Yet I can find hundreds, literally at this point, microbiologists, evolutionary scientists, geneticists, that actually went into this and their testimony ends up, they get to a point where they're putting their career, in a lot of senses, on the line. Because if you come out and say these things as a professor, you tend to lose your job.
Right.
And let's hold that one
Yeah.
there for a second. These guys have converted to Christianity. These scientists. I mean, it's scientist after scientist after scientist. I'm not prepared to give you a list of names right now, but I'll probably have a rolling list of names when this thing's online, and go look up any of those names. And these guys have given testimonies saying that once I really got in and did the statistical math, the probabilities, and I'm going to cite a few things in a minute, that the formation of life as a mutation, as an accident, and not just one. It's not like there was one accident. It's relying on millions of mutations and accidents. As a systems engineer, I mean, what kind of software do you work in?
Name
So
any
like
software.
operating
pretty
systems,
much-
like Windows, Unix,
I've done Windows,
Linux.
Linux, OS2. I can literally.
Well, let's
speak-
take Windows.
I've written device drivers, you name it. I've
Could
pretty much
Windows
done.
have ever written itself?
Could Windows have ever written itself? In the beginning? No, not in the slightest.
What happens to Windows when you introduce a mutated line of code?
It depends. Sometimes it works better. Sometimes it crashes. So it's
Does it give me an example of how a random grouping of letters could make Windows work better?
well, actually, I can give you a good thought experiment that a computer engineer did, which was he was going for the monkeys in a room typing idea, which was do
Eventually they'll write
do
War
we
and
get
Peace.
Shakespeare? So he started off with a software algorithm that basically was going to do the random things, and you look at the millions of years it requires to do that. Then he changed the software to say, I want it to start using things that work in the language. So, in other words, when I start getting recognizable patterns, I want it to freeze those and keep those there, and then continue on and keep, evolving until I get that. And when he changed those type of parameters, looking for things that work, suddenly the amount of time it took, cut down to like 9 hours. It's like literally you could get Shakespeare from random number generator by keying in on certain words and patterns working in a much faster form. And that's kind of one of the thoughts about it, is that it's not so much it was just random. It was random looking for things that work and then building on the things that work. And that actually kind of speeds up the process.
So if there weren't a higher power in this experiment,
gonna
which
say
is
that,
this
yeah.
guy,
Right. And that doesn't necessarily say there isn't. I mean, that's one of the things I always say. I guess often when I look at Christianity, I always want to say, well, this is almost your bread and butter. This is like it. This is where you say, look, this is the process, and suddenly the patterns started getting locked in. Now, is that possible? Again, we don't know yet. Science is still out the door on that. We don't have those starting conditions.
I'm glad you acknowledge that, because I actually used to think science had this completely answered. Like this was cold, locked fact. We were searching for one missing link, and kabam, the whole picture would be put together. But I didn't realize actually science has. There are so many more questions. I came to realize, we sit here, we call it science, and we have this picture in our head that, words like evidence and fact start coming to mind. But actually, the very science we talk about, for me, is as much a religion as is religion. It's just under a different name called science, but there is many guesses, and in some cases, I think, guesses that are even way more far out than... Because don't get me wrong,
well, a lot of it's
God
negative.
putting 2 people on Earth to seed humanity, that's a pretty freaking incredible story to begin with.
Sure.
Yeah.
In fact, there's probabilities. Let me read this little passage I picked out actually just a few hours ago. Science of probability has not been favorable to evolutionary theory, even with the theory's loose time restraints. Dr. James Coppage of the Center for Probability Research in Biology in California made some amazing calculations. He writes, after applying the laws of he applied all the laws of probability studies to the possibility of a single cell coming into existence by chance. He considered in the same way a single protein molecule and even a single gene. His discoveries are revolutionary. He computed a world in which the entire crust of the Earth, all the oceans, all the atoms, and the whole crust were available. He then had these amino acids bind at a rate 1.5 trillion times faster than they do in nature. In computing the possibilities, he found that to provide a single protein molecule by chance combination would take 10 to the 262nd power. That's 262 zeros. 6 zeros is a million. 262 zeros, I don't know what that number is. That is the number 1 followed by 262 zeros. To get a single cell, the single smallest living cell known to mankind, which is called the microplasm hominis, H39, would take 10 to the 119,841st power. That's how many years. That means that if you took thin pieces of paper and wrote 1 and then wrote zeros after it, you would fill up the entire known universe with paper before you could ever even write that number. That is how many years it would take to make one living cell smaller than any human cell. There's a few other scientists we'll go to. He was just looking at this from a place of probability. Now, you can, in a sense, diffuse that argument because we're all here. So something happened. Something had to have happened. So I guess let's start, Troy. What is in your mind the theory of evolution? What does it mean to you? Like if you were to explain it to if you were to write a one-page paper on it, explain it to me, like your view of it, your version of it.
I guess my version of it has always been it's a constant state of change on everything, and it plays a lot into microevolution, just microevolution happening over huge periods of time. It's as these patterns split up and different genes suddenly lock in, and again, evolution now isn't so much just all natural selection. It's about mutation. It's about genetic drift. It's about all these different kind of factors. There's not this great catch-all, one size fits all theory anymore. There's so many different theories, and how do these play in? It's just changed over time. And one of the toughest concepts I think for a lot of people to handle is how much time we've had. It's very difficult to think in terms of 1 billion years. To get to a certain point, or that humans, by most estimates, what's the oldest human right now? I want to say it's 340,000. I may be wrong on my timing now. What they consider one of the oldest forms of human, one of the oldest hominids, I think goes back 3.4 million years. And it's just changed over time. It's micro expanded over time.
And how was that age determined?
It depends. There's all sorts of different dating techniques they use now. I know a lot of people like to kind of jump on carbon-14 dating. That's actually one of the least ones they use now because that's really only accurate within, I think it's 20,000 years. Before that, you have to go much farther. But there's a lot of different type of radioacid decay measurements that they use. There's also, and then I guess going just from pure geology standpoints, there's the, again, the fossil records, things like that. So most of the ages they determine through a lot of different techniques to kind of come up with that kind of time frame that, and again, is it perfect? Probably not. But is it good estimate compared to recreatable situations? Yeah, it's a fairly decent estimate.
That's where we might have our first disagreement because carbon-14 dating, that's been around for a while. And you guys understand how that dating works? They look at the rate at which the number of the carbon-14 atom dissipates, and it speeds up. And one of the problems they've had is, that they'll get a woolly mammoth and they'll date its tusks at 8,000 years, or vice versa, and its body at 40,000 years. It's the same animal. There was another experiment. Lava rocks from a volcano in Hawaii, which erupted in 1801, were tested using, this was a potassium argon method. The readings showed them to be nearly 3 billion years old. Yet moon rocks were tested by various radiometric methods, yielding dates ranging from 700 million to 28 billion years. So I would read something where they throw out terms like carbon-14 dating and geologic timescale. I'm like, okay, the scientists have this covered. What I ended up finding is that it seems there is a level of circular reasoning. The fossil records dating is based on the geologic timescale. And you guys know what I'm talking about, the geologic timescale? We're talking about the trees that were trapped vertically, and scientist A says, well, these layers took millions upon millions of years to form.
And fauna, through different stratia.
Meaning this tree would somehow have to stand straight up for millions of years as layers kept. Then the other theory, which is, and again, what I can't find out is there is almost a disproportionate rejection of anything that could be associated with the Bible story. Yet there does seem to have been a worldwide flood at some point. That through current geologic research, not only that, but just go back into ancient history, there's 270, I think was the number, societies, cultures that all had a documented story of this worldwide cataclysmic.
There's been multiple extinction level events. In fact, they are kind of saying we're in one right now because humans are an extinction level event.
We are.
Especially Democrats. I buy it.
Even if I wasn't biblical, I'd say that. But the Bible says there's an extinction level event.
There's definitely been X number of them, and a lot of the evidence that they find is kind of related to the fact that there's been multiple. So again, it's why those parables, it's why when somebody wants to say, well, there's never been a giant flood, well, maybe there was, based on that area.
Well, stratigraphy tells us that there was indeed a flood.
Right.
There's no arguing this.
Well, let's get back to the circular reasoning.
Right.
So,
that's where it comes from. Because you find a fossil in a rock, how do you know it's old? Because it's in a rock.
Right. And
how old's the rock? Well, it's old because it's got a fossil in it. Whatever.
Well, they find out, okay, these are the other materials that are around this fossil, and according to the geologic time scale, this fossil must be 4 billion years old. How do we know the geologic time scale is right? They go back to look at the fossil record and say, well, we found these fossils that are 4 billion years old in this layer of sediment. Right. It is a complete circular reasoning. And what I've come to find out is the scientists that have flipped, they decided to go in and actually look at the empirical data, not just what they heard on TV a million times over, but to go in and actually see how these things work, it's getting under the hood of your car. And it seems the ones that go to the trouble to do that, and I totally understand this now, just some light bulb ends up going off where they're all of a sudden like, wait a minute, this whole scientific evolutionary belief, it's based on two houses of cards that are leaning on each other, and you pull one out. I mean, a fossil sitting there by itself doesn't tell us anything. But I do love how they'll find like a fragment of a leg bone and a tooth, and then they'll recreate some giant creature.
Well, that kind of goes back to the hominid thing. You know, they may find a set of bones in Africa that might be a hominid based on its structure. Where, though, it's, in my mind, that only proves a monkey died in Africa. But where do they get that actually has anything to do with humanity?
Well, that's where DNA comes in. That's where being able to decode the human genome, they can actually say and see the relationship
with something that's 3.5 million years old.
Yeah.
Well, few weird. I don't want to get off on this tangent, but we've
it's
actually found dinosaur parts that still had active biological material on it,
soft tissue.
Exactly, which we've never seen anything more than 2,000 years do that. But this is now suddenly we found something that had 65 million years of cocooned, still. I don't know what the word for it is, but biological
it's amazing.
matter.
Yes.
Well,
somebody wants Jurassic Park. That's why.
Either that's what they found, or they found something 2,000 years old that they had
Right.
misdated.
Well, 3,500 years old, but who's
DNA,
counting?
and because that's what did it for me, was when I went and studied what is DNA. Well, what is DNA to you?
Well, DNA is the building blocks of life. At least, it's the roadmap that life takes. So, in a simplistic,
I think it's fair to say it's biological software. Is that not a fair?
Yeah, it's
that's that's a good way to put it, I think. So, I know what I was taught in school, that Darwin's theory talked about how there was a simple cell and it mutated and somehow got washed up on a beach and then it turned into another cell and okay, all I did was have this fuzzy picture of billions of years. Okay, it figured it out. Okay. But what I found odd about DNA, which Darwin did not know about in his time, was that inside of a cell, there is information. And I'm not talking about something simple as grow a nose so you can breathe. We're talking about in a simple cell is a computer code that does some incredible things that all of humanity still can't even reproduce with experiments, with science. Yes, it took us, I think, about 10 or 15 years to decode the genome, 15 billion lines of DNA code. That existed. And we now can go to the point where we can find which gene on that double helix, which one is the one that controls being able to see colors, or it controls your arm, how long your arm is going to be, or how symbiotic systems like your eyeball are going to work. So somehow it's not just that there was one mutation and a cell began to turn into people. Somewhere inside that cell there was a computer program, a digital program. We think of what's the
binary?
Binaries 2. This is a 4-pronged digital program. 4 amino acids. They must all connect in perfect order or the whole system shuts down. I mean, if a doctor comes to you after your child was just born and he says, there's a genetic anomaly with your child, are you going to be excited because he's got a new superpower?
Right.
Or are you going to be freaking out because his body's not going to work? So I have a very hard time believing that a computer code, especially I've had work with Windows, I've gone into the registry of my computer before and typed in one wrong digit. The whole blue screen dead, stops working. I have yet to find out a case where I go in and just throw in some letters into the registry, and it has new abilities.
I've seen it once where somebody hit a key that altered a point of memory, and it made something work that wasn't working before.
But wasn't it one of
That wouldn't be a random
Isn't that
entry,
essentially one of these? And then boom, it starts.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. One time they hit a key.
So this one for me, with all of our modern day science, now this was done in the 90s. Pretty good computing power in the 90s.
Yeah.
Took them 10 or 15 years to decode the human genome.
Yeah, it was distributed, actually. There was a project that went to a lot of people's computers. You could download a screensaver, so when your computer was bored, you were offsetting and running, decoding the human genome for... Yeah, they stopped that project, I forget when, but yeah, basically a bunch of computer geeks, knowing all their servers were doing nothing at night, helped decode the human genome back then.
Okay. And that I think you're totally right about that. That's how I remember. How we decoded the genome really doesn't matter. We've done it.
Right.
Took a long time, a whole bunch of effort. That wasn't to build it. That was just to analyze how this hyper-complex system works. And I'm going to invoke Chuck Missler today.
Yeah.
So we're all from the Detroit area. We know the Rouge plant, right? The Ford Rouge plant.
Yeah.
My dad, we used to drive over it, my dad would say this at one time was the biggest factory in the world, and the Japanese did a few things, and it was the third biggest. But either way, it is the factory. It goes out as far as the eye can see.
Yeah, my great-grandfather retired from there.
Chuck Missler used to be the head of the River Rouge plant, the Rouge plant here for Ford. In fact, he would go on to be the CEO of several Fortune 500 companies. He now kind of does what we do, which is he realized holy cow, this Bible thing is a lot more true, and he had some very logical, highly educated guy. And he said it struck him because when he broke down what DNA is information. It's actually not. Amino acids are the building blocks. How they're arranged is determined by this code. RNA is a duplication of the code, which it's like sending a fax of the information to another cell so that it can take the information and move on. And he ended up using a metaphor. And he's like, when I ran the Rouge plant, I had 15,000 people working there. We had shipping, receiving. We would take metals and ores in their raw form and turn them. And at the end of the day, out comes a working automobile with steering wheels and brakes and rubber tires and windows and all of that. And he said the complexity of what's in DNA is actually so far beyond that. First of all, it operates on the very small. Secondly, it'd be the equivalent of that factory being able to duplicate itself every second over and over and over and over and over again, keeping all of its systems finely integrated. Because if there is a mutation, what we've found out, which is entropy, that when there is a mutation, when there is a breakdown, and things, it's the second law of thermodynamics, and that is entropy. Things break down. Things disorganize over time. You always lose a little material. As you take oil out of the ground and put it into barrels, some drips out. And if you take it from barrels and it's turned into gasoline, there's entropy. We're losing some of the energy. And then when it's turned into gasoline, goes into your car, a few drops of oil, it's always breaking down. Things disorganize themselves. You're going back to your garage. How many of us have ever had a garage get organized by it? You'll clean it up one day and then check back a month later, and the disorganization's coming back in. That I believe. I don't know. I believe that's a law, not even a theory anymore.
The second law of thermodynamics.
Yeah.
There's always a misinterpretation. Just as a little segue of that, a lot with creationist debates, is the fact that they neglect a piece of it, and the big piece of it is things move to disorder in a closed system. And in a closed system defines that there's no more energy introduced to the system. Now, the Earth is not a closed system. We're getting bombarded with a metric ton of energy every day from the sun. So it's one of those things where It's not quite what people say sometimes when it's it's about closed systems, and the Earth is not a closed system.
Okay, fair enough. We can leave entropy out of it, and we got plenty to talk about without it. 5 minutes till break. So my question is, and to expand on what Chuck Missler said, and then I'll leave you with a question. I'd like to hear what you guys have to say. Is he ended up looking at DNA, which I think we all agree is information. It's blueprints. It is a design. It is something highly complex. And when we go pull DNA out of ancient, the most ancient things that we've ever found, we see a lot of similarities in the DNA of that thing to us. I mean, there was high complexity even in simple-celled organisms. So where did that information come from? Where did it come from?
That's the great question. That's the one that we haven't answered yet.
Does it sound like it comes from something random or something smart?
Well, that's where it depends on over time. And one of the things, I don't think we've touched on it yet, there's a great branch of mathematics known as chaos theory. And chaos theory is that there's actual order in chaos. And that's used today to do a lot of things like, define weather patterns and things like that. So when you say something is completely chaotic, a lot of times your first jump is, there's no way. But when you realize that certain things have, certain patterns in them, it's based on their initial starting state, and it builds, fractals are probably the most representation of chaos theory.
Do you guys all know what fractals
I'm
are?
familiar with that.
Yeah, it's repeating patterns. So when you see a pattern repeat itself, replicate itself from a chaotic starting point, that's where, wait a minute, there is some order in chaos. So is it intelligent design? Is it not? I mean, that's a good speculation. I mean, again, I'm not 1,000% sure one way or the other. I'm open to, more information about it.
Fractals for me this is sort of a side tangent, but you can look at, there's examples of fractals all over the place. You look at the veins of a leaf, and you go into, microscopically, you look into one little partition of a vein inside of a leaf. It'll have a pattern. And then you back out, and you'll see that the whole little mini branch has the same pattern. Then you'll back out, and you'll see the whole leaf has the exact same pattern. And then you'll back out further, and the tree has the same pattern. We also see it in
geology, definitely.
From the large to the small. So let's take Stephen Hawking's. He's a scientist of the small. He's a quantum physicist. And we're going to juxtapose him to Albert Einstein and his theory of relativity, which is the theory of how very large things come about and how they interact on each other. We're still looking for that unification theory. String theorists, I think, are onto something because they've identified 10 dimensions.
Oh, they're up to 14 now.
Are they?
Yeah,
okay, I remember.
I
heard
going.
10, 11.
Yeah.
I've mentioned this before.
When in doubt, they add another one, it seems to be.
Yeah, I'd love to find out how that. I don't know enough about that type of math. So that's not empirical data for me when it comes to looking at that. An example of a fractal is you take an atom, a neutron, proton. It's basically a little dot. It's the equivalent. I've used this example before. If you put a little golf ball at the center of Michigan football stadium at the 50-yard line, and then you take a little green pea and have it circle the stadium right around the last row of seats, we've got essentially what the proton, neutron operates.
To scale, basically.
And then you scale it up to the universe, and you've got the exact same system operating. We've got a sun in the center of our universe. It's got 99.99% of all the matter in this solar system that last 0.001% is made up of the 9 or 8, whatever. Neil deGrasse, he got one of those planets removed, so I think we're down to 8, but maybe back up to, I don't know where we are.
Which is total BS, by the way. Pluto should still be a planet.
It should be. I mean, he was in. Let's let him stay in. So,
Isn't it once a planet, always a planet?
yeah. So there's this, where the cutting edge of science is, I notice school books aren't the same, because school books are still talking about how gravity is what keeps the planets in alignment. But in astronomical circles, in quantum and relative physics circles, they all say no, it's electromagnetism. And if you really think, we think, it's the Earth revolving around the sun, and we were taught to believe gravity is what keeps us in place. But this isn't, I'm right now holding my finger and I'm doing like a swirling motion, so I'll put up a graphic for it when we're doing this. But that's not really the motion we're going through, because we've also got the sun is going around a galaxy, and it's traveling 600 and some thousand miles an hour. And what you really have is a corkscrew. I mean, that is what the Earth's orbit looks like. Is it's following a sun that's moving. It, to me, is much. This is where I associate this with a fractal. That what we see in a little atom is the same setup we see in our stars, where you've got a little ball of energy, and outside it are. Anyone have any thoughts about that?
I agree. That's kind of.
It was an
Yeah,
interesting.
and in between all of it is space that they still don't really know.
Is it time for break?
Pretty much.
Is it?
Yeah.
Why don't you
All right.
lead us into break?
Okay. Hey, Ken, wake up. We're going to pay a few bills. Thanks, buddy.
Gonna set an alarm clock by his.
Yeah, no, I mean, give us a lot to think about. So we'll take the break and think about it, pay a few bills, and we will be right back. Welcome back to Down the Rabbit Hole. I'm Howard. I'm here with Kat, Dave Kenny, and our special guest, Troy. We are talking about science versus theology in the guise of creation versus evolution, and we've taken it very, very far back. So I'm gonna let Dave continue. Dave and Troy continue what they were going on with. I think it's pretty interesting.
It's something I asked off air. I'll just re-ask on air to make sure. Are there any particular parts of this? What a big debate, evolution versus creation. But any other little codicils inside there anyone else wanted to discuss?
I kind of like the path that's going on here. It's pretty thorough so far. Nothing's being thrown in the room. I think it's all right. Everybody's playing nice in the sandbox. So,
how did the eyeball get here?
Well, I mean, I don't know.
An eye is an organ. It's actually made up of, I think, 6 or 7 parts that all must be present. You need your rods, your retina, your cornea, your pupil. I'm not a...
Your cones.
Thank you. So, in evolutionary theory, one day a long time ago, some creature got rods, but those rods were useless until these other 5 or 6 mutations would have happened. Now, evolution, in one sense, states that this useless rods and cones, which do nothing without the other materials, should have been evolved out. But somehow they stuck around long enough for yet the second component to come, which could have been millions of years later, then the third component, to the point where we've got, that's an example of a symbiotic system, where we need multiple things acting together at the same time. Now, these don't just happen in our body. There are also species that are symbiotic, that do not live without each other. What's the little species that lives in the stomachs of...
The bacterium.
I'm not going to, unless someone else knows about that, I'm not.
Yeah, that's I don't remember.
The ones that aid digestion.
So how
they
do
have a buzz term.
Right.
And remember, this process didn't just happen for the eye. The same thing had to happen for our pulmonary. All of our systems, our skeletal, our adrenal, our limbic, our pulmonary. All of these are systems that rely on other pieces that all have to be there at the same place at the same time. You can have a great computer code, but if you don't have a piece of hardware to put it on, what do you have? Nothing. You need them both, and they need to both be there operating. So any theories then on how the eye could have evolved to what it is today?
Well, I don't think it evolved at all. So
I guess I'm asking Troy. What's your
Why are you looking
guy.
at him?
Well, I don't know, because he's looking at me.
Well,
so.
the initial concept you would think that an organism would need an eye would be it's detecting energy, it's detecting light, it's detecting various waveforms. You can see different species sometimes have different levels of it. Some can see in the infrared, some can see in the ultraviolet, some don't see worth anything, which would be me, which is why I wear glasses. So you can see the initial reaction would be, hey, I'm looking to detect light, and how would that evolve over time? Well, it might be some random gene that appears somewhere that's kind of useless, later gets pulled in to operate with something else. Maybe this can change over time to become a piece that, suddenly starts working with this one piece that is, its job is detecting light. Now we're going to try and do more with that. We're going to try and feed that information somewhere else. So
Who's we?
Who's we? That would be the universe, or
Why
the
the
royal
universe?
we, like all of
Like
us.
the creator?
Just
Anyways, you were talking
for that
like somebody
species,
creating
yeah.
that.
Yeah,
so
no,
I
for the species. In other words, that species is looking to detect light, and over time, it's going to start pulling in things. Maybe they're useless up front. Maybe they become useful down the line. Maybe initially they change from their original form to some other form. So I guess that's my theory on how you would get an eye. But
Yeah, I'm.
again, I like the example of a giraffe, right? Giraffe has a long neck, so it can eat the leaves high up in the trees. Doesn't really have to compete for food much. It's a food source, but that's another story. So how did this manage to come about? Because really the only way a giraffe can survive is by the special valving that it has in its neck. So when it goes to bend down to take a drink of water, it shuts off the blood supply for that time till it's done drinking water, and then it opens back up. So how would something like this evolve? Because if it didn't have it initially and the neck grew, and again, really, you'll notice this train of thought, like guessing. It's really just that. It's guessing and a lot of making stuff up. The first time it tried to drink of water, it'd pass out from the blood rushing to its brain. It would drown. So you wouldn't have a giraffe. So, and it certainly didn't come from a whale. I mean, so, these are, how did this come about by accident?
I could buy the giraffe long neck situation through microevolution, where, there are these creatures that, they don't have long necks yet, but their surroundings are such that the only food is high up on a tree, and that one of them is
Right,
born
but
with sort of a longer neck.
How would
He's
they? How
able-
would they reproduce? I mean, how would they have enough energy to reproduce if they're not getting that food that they can?
Genetically,
that's-
though,
you-
Or
genetically,
are you saying that trees were just shorter, and as trees grew, the giraffes' necks lengthened?
I guess
Well-
the bottom line is genetically it's still a giraffe.
That's the other thing. You just said reproduction, and this is another place where, for me, evolution falls apart, because talk about symbiotic relationships. In order for humanity to get here, you don't just need one mutation to create even one cell. According to Dr. Coolidge or College that we went over, one cell there's so many. The odds of it's a miracle. Essentially, you get into a miracle at, what is it, at 50 zeros? It's an act of God.
Pretty much.
So this had 262 zeros behind it.
What did you say? 50 zeros? It's an
Well, it's a
To the
statistical
50th power. Like if the odds of it are 1 in 50 or 1 in 10 to the 50th power, it means there's 50 zeros behind
Right, I
that
understand.
10.
it's a half a Googleplex.
Okay, I get what that is. But
Statistically,
why
it's
does that make it-
impossible.
Okay, that's all.
It basically means the odds of you a regular way to say this, like in our own terms, is
Ain't gonna happen.
winning the lotto, for instance, is what? 1 in a million?
Right.
Okay. That's 6 zeros.
No, it's actually 1 in 300 million, but
whatever. Let's just do a
changes it a bit.
Let's just do a 1 in a million lotto.
All right.
That's got 6 zeros behind it. It'd be a miracle. I mean, it'd be a pretty big deal. Now, someone's going to win the lotto, so winning the lotto is not a miracle, okay? Someone's going to win it tomorrow. We just don't know who it is, okay? That's not a miracle. But if someone won a second lotto that had a 1 in a million chance, it's possible. But now that's pretty incredible, right?
Right.
Now we're talking, you got to multiply those together. We've gone from 6 now to 12 zeros. Now imagine you'd have to win a 1 in a million lotto every day for like 100 years.
Right.
That is, some people are betting their faith that that's more likely than we were created.
Right.
And the funny thing is, and maybe you can pull up some Bible passages if you guys have some, but I do find it odd that this ancient text said the truth of the world is hidden in the very small. Essentially, you're not going to be able to see it until the last days. And here we are in the last days, and we now finally, the science of particle physics really didn't get teeth until the Nazis started working on an atomic program in the early to mid-30s, which I will remind everyone again was, if you believe the biblical story, the fallen angels that taught technology to the humans. Now, this was the second rebellion. These were the Watcher angels. These are the ones that came and mated with humanity.
Trey, this is like Lord of the Rings stuff and Game of Thrones. I think you dig this stuff. What he's talking about is the Bible. But
Right.
go on.
No, I'm familiar with that.
And this, for me, was one of the first problems in the Bible. It's like, okay, all right.
Right.
Angels, really, these spiritual creatures, they came down, they mated with man, and they made giants? Really? Well, you know what the funny thing is? Just a sidebar, but if you, I wish you guys would start bringing your
This
computers.
is a computer.
Well,
What are you
then
talking?
show him
What do you
a
want?
picture of, not just one picture of a giant. You go in, and I've probably listened to, read about 50, maybe 100 archaeologists, geologists, that they're in the field, they're doing a dig, and they come across the skeleton of a 30, 40-foot human being. Something that would turn evolution on its ear, because those creatures should have survived, not we smaller versions. And it's the same story every time. What do you do when something like that happens? Well, you call the local museum, you call the Smithsonian, whatever it might be, and all of them have the exact same story. They found the remains of these giants, and all of a sudden the military comes in, cordons off the area, takes all the research, and what's left are the photographs on the phones of the guys there. Now, that's just one little place where the Bible said something incredible that absolutely, in my mind, there were humanoid creatures of gigantic proportions walking this earth. In fact, did you guys see the Japanese one I showed you?
I don't know if I
Just
don't.
look up Japanese Nephilim and see if you
You
can.
know what was so weird? And you know what I'm about to say, but Dave was telling me about this, and I just happened to be reading in Genesis when we had this conversation. The next day I get up and I'm reading the exact scripture, and then I have a program that I DVR on, it's the History Channel, secular channel, right? That night I come home, it's about exactly that, the giants. The History Channel, the secular channel, so it presented both sides of the argument. But, that was just so strange how, boom, like all that, because I had no idea.
So right here,
I saw that video.
Did you?
I've seen that with the Japanese.
I don't even know
one.
if that's the one that's going to play.
Yeah.
This is from 1909, I want to say. And it's funny, but why are we watching cat videos and the 300th diet show on CNN when things like this are out there?
Yeah, well, with the giants, there's a newspaper. The newspapers and even scientific journals were littered with reports of these findings right up until about the 50s when TV was started to, be in every home and every, But
Yeah, but everything was so regionalized back then that it would.
New York Times, there's plenty
Yeah.
of you can
but
find
still,
these.
But
you know,
still, even the New York Times didn't reach where the New York Times reaches.
I mean, they're
today.
all over. They found these things in the Midwest. I mean, some of the
They found them on all. I don't know about Antarctica. We have found pyramids on Antarctica.
Yeah.
But we
sure.
have found these giant skeletons on every single continent.
Right.
And if you go into the New York Times articles, you can see them. You can see the reports. Now, they didn't have cameras going back, in the 1820 version of the New York Times, but just it's newspaper report after newspaper report after newspaper report. And you can look those up, too, of local man unearths 22-foot giant, remains sent to Smithsonian. It's same story even back then, almost as if there were forces at work in this world that didn't want us to know these giants existed. Because if someone could see that with their own eyes and believe it, all of a sudden I don't know how you could avoid coming to the conclusion that there's a massive problem with evolution, because it's funny, the same guy that says he created us, he said there were giants, he said there was a flood, he also said that humanity is going to be smart up until the last few generations. And there's some passages about we're going to think we're getting smart, but we're actually becoming more foolish than any other generation that's existed. And the concept of evolution was absolutely foreign to the world in 1820. Everyone in the world knew God put us here. But now you've got 50% of the United States that believes God put us here, and the other 50 are roughly in the evolutionary camp. And later on in that same book, this guy that I think is the guy behind the computer code that is the information that creates life, he goes on to say, if you don't recognize that I made all this, you're literally playing with fire, because if you don't recognize my creation, you are not getting into my kingdom. I mean, no, that's one of the many ways you can disqualify yourself. And I find all of this, our mass media, the institutions that control what and how we think, it's all pretty well disguised. But when you peel through a few layers, all of a sudden you realize that there's this common theme. Anything that might prove the Bible seems to be purposefully hidden from the public's view. Now, the Internet's done something unbelievable, because we now have access to the greatest library in the history of humanity. I can find out anything. I can find out, Troy, the dimensions of your house, or what drugs, Dave, you take, or does anyone ever had police? You can find out anything.
Right.
What the coffee production of Columbia was last week.
So there's an old saying about the internet that everything on the internet is true and everything on the internet is not true, and that's one of the facts of the internet. It's everything is true and everything is not
Without a
true.
doubt, I wouldn't. I can go find a book
a lot
on
of crackpots out there.
I can
for
find a
sure.
book on Santa Claus at my local library, but I'm not going to toss the library out because it's got the,
Right.
I'm going to try and get information verified. When I hear, when you see 50 archaeologists, one after the other, telling the exact same story, putting their research on the line, their pension on the line, their social standing, their the respect they have, their credibility, coming out and saying something that is a complete diversion away from what we've been taught.
Here's something interesting I found. I found an article from less than a year ago on a website called World News Daily Report. Okay? Headline: Smithsonian admits the destruction of thousands of giant human skeletons in the early 1900s. U.S. Supreme Court ruling has forced the Smithsonian Institution to release classified papers dating from the early 1900s that proves the organization was involved in a major historical cover-up of evidence showing giant human remains in tens of thousands.
Yeah, and we're not talking about a genetic disorder where you're really tall and you need a cane. That's not a physically healthy giant.
Right.
I'm talking about the Japanese guy we just saw,
Right.
where these guys, look,
And they're saying that the whole
regular people came up to this guy's mid-thigh.
I was going to say, if I'm not mistaken, I think that video is from a Japanese film called Little. Got to remember the name of the film. I'll have to track it down and find it. I think that footage is actually from that film, but it's again, it's not discounting. Hey, we have found an island of hobbits. That's like a documented across the scientific community. Found a whole island full of little people. So if somebody said there were giants, maybe. I'm not going to say
it's not
yay or nay.
I found that film late. Like my opinions were formed before I'd ever seen that, just by looking at photographs of archaeological digs. And there definitely are hoaxes out there. There's no doubt.
Right.
The same book that predicted all of these things also said, there's going to be a deceiver in the world. My personal entry way into this entire path of, let's call it alternative theory, alternative thinking, began with looking into 9/11. Did you have any opinions on 9/11?
Some and many, I guess. One part of, I guess I'm not a complete, I guess what's the way of saying it? Do I think 9/11 was exploited by the government? Yeah. Do I think it was necessarily a cover-up or staged by the government? I'm not wholly on board with that theory. Was it exploited? Definitely. One of the things, though, I tend to always put on subjects like that is, when the government tends to fall in the range of stupidity most of the time, and staging something like that, as complex as that, with so many moments of failures, you kind of go to Occam's razor. What's the simplest explanation of this? It is the one that works. And to me, if it was going to be a government conspiracy, I think they would have just blew up the building. It was just so much easier. You just blow up the building, and then you have your ready band of terrorists there who you drag in front of the public, and these are the guys who did it, and presto, you've created the conspiracy. So listening to both sides, you get some of the experts about.
But what if the people who planned it were so smart
that they counted on that.
That they counted on the fact that they have been leading you to believe that our leaders are morons. Okay, G-Dub, I mean, he can lead the United States.
That is part
but
of,
he's a moron.
That
he's
is,
a complete
by the way,
moron, that guy.
And that is part of the deception.
And
so
what if they counted on you thinking that G-Dub's a moron and could never do it, and they're like, they're never going to buy it. Let's just do it.
Great SNL sketch years ago, which had Phil Hartman as Ronald Reagan playing kind of the doddering old Ronald
Phil
Reagan.
Hartman.
And then they would shut the door, and as soon as they would shut the door, suddenly he was super smart Reagan. And yeah, I can see that easily, because I think parody there was a little too close to reality sometimes. But.
Well, okay, so I think the thing is we're talking about there can only be one truth. We all know that. We all agree.
Well,
that
truth is singular.
Right. So only one truth is true, right? So that means there's a lot of false things out there. So what did Jesus say about this stuff? He said, listen to this, Troy, the coming of the lawless one, meaning Satan, is according to the work of Satan, with all power,
Antichrist.
signs, and lying wonders, and with all unrighteous deception among those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth, that they may be saved. And for this reason, God will send them strong delusion. God will send them strong delusion, that they should believe the lie, that they all may be condemned who did not believe the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. And what does unrighteousness means? Not righteous. What does righteous mean? That you have faith in God. It doesn't mean you're a dirty bastard necessarily. It means that, what made Abraham righteous? His faith in the Lord. It wasn't that he was a good guy with a great heart. He, in fact, was a big fat liar, Abraham was. He was always trying to get his wife to have sex with these guys so nobody would kill him, right? They were terrible. Well, I shouldn't say that, but But anyways,
Yeah, he wasn't the coolest
Well,
character.
I mean,
in the
speaking
Bible.
of another Abraham,
He lied once at least. What?
Abraham Lincoln knew there were giants. So
Did he?
As
Yeah.
a side note, that is from the film. It's called Big Man Japan. This
All
is
right.
the trailer to it. So if you want to look it up on the internet, it's a Japanese film. I recall seeing it a few. I'm a
So the
huge
documentary is this?
no. It's a Japanese fantasy movie called Big Man Japan. I'm a huge cinephile.
I wonder where they found
so
the giant to star in that movie.
possible, but
Well, like I said, I mean,
Was it-
Abraham.
was it directed by the
I mean,
guy that
Abraham
did the
Lincoln
moon
knew
landings?
because 1850-ish, 1848, right?
Yes.
Back then. So this, I believe, anyway, that you get back far enough before technology kind of took over. This was basically mainstream knowledge. I mean, I think people kind of realized this was the truth, and he had a speech at Niagara Falls where he said something along the lines that our great ancestors, the extinct giant whose bones fill the mounds of America, gazed upon this just as we do now. Now, why would a U.S. president say something like this? If it wasn't true, I mean, as far as mainstream knowledge, you can imagine if right now a world leader was like, you know how the Giants used to be, not referring to the sports team. I mean, but I really think it was basically mainstream, and it as a result of cover up and destruction, it was erased or tried to be erased from us finding out about this.
Yeah, there are certain books that talk about these fallen giants, these fallen angels, or the offspring of them, the Nephilim, which, like the Book of Enoch, which was part of the, wasn't the Nag Hammadi, what was the other one?
It
with
was
the Dead Sea
1848,
Scrolls?
dude.
1848.
1848.
What's that?
Abraham's
Abraham
speech.
Lincoln quote. Dave pretty much nailed it. The eyes of that species of extinct giants whose bones fill the mounds of America have gazed on Niagara as ours do now. Abraham Lincoln, 1848.
Yeah, actually, and for all you listeners out there, do a little research into the giants and the Grand Canyon. Native Americans had run-ins with them all the time. They were like a known... Now, why was that information pulled out of
Well, because
our life?
Because again, I mean, this goes back to so many of the theories that we talk about. What are they trying to do? If you can take and obliterate one of the things that we are supposed to take as historical fact out of the Bible, if you can obliterate that, then everything in the Bible must be false. So why did they get rid of the giants? Because they have a theory that America was originally populated by Asians who walked across a landmass and became the American Indians.
Yeah, and originally evolved from apes.
Right, that evolved from tadpoles that turned into apes.
well, and I think Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 20
25 is a good one.
explains all of this.
Yeah.
It says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them." So what he's saying is, in other scripture says that the word of God is written on our heart, right?
Read verse 25.
But I will. But okay, so what he's saying is the truth. Like, I created all of you, and the truth is written on your heart, his, yours, right? But you are suppressing the truth because you don't believe my son was who he said he was. So by virtue of putting other things out there that contradict the Bible, that is, I mean, Jesus talked about this. The wrath of God is revealed from all heaven against ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth and unrighteousness. And it doesn't say on purpose. I mean, I used to suppress the truth because I didn't believe it, right? But let me finish. I'm sorry. Because that which is known, okay, for God made it evident to them. That now he's talking about consciousness. He's talking about what's in our consciousness inside of us. But then he talks about outside. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. And I believe that science is the study of God's knowledge. And what verse, 25?
Romans chapter 1, verse 25.
It's interesting, you said within yourself. I haven't vetted this yet, but I've there have been a few studies very, very recently, last few years, where inside our genetic code, we've actually found a written message from God where he
should look into that.
He puts his name in there,
Bush.
and it basically says, you've now discovered the...
This, I think, sums it up for me right here.
All right,
And
what
it
is
had
it?
before. It's very short, but... For they exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature or created thing, depending on which version, rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. That is evolution to me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
without a doubt. I think those are, these theories that have popped up late in humanity under the guise of science. And no one can... science can't be debated. But what I ended up finding is that the same thing you had, Troy, is, well, there's a lot of questions, unanswered questions. I mean, science has not answered some of these questions, but I do find it
But that's
statistically
good science, though. Good science should always be questioning things, and I think there gets some people who are very vehement that this is the only answer and it must be right, instead of being open-minded to say, hey, look, this is what we're theorizing now, but get us more information, get us new information, get us something that refines this. We started with, Newtonian gravity, and somebody went, well, that doesn't quite explain the motions of certain things, and, that's what led us to relativity. It wasn't sticking with the same answer. And I think there's probably a problem on maybe both sides of the community where certain scientists are like, this is it, it has to be it because this is my life's work, and it can't be wrong, as opposed to somebody, I guess, like me, who's kind of, I'm specifically a computer programmer, but I like a lot of science, and I'm open to new ideas in science. I'm not stuck with one theory. I'm open to something else coming in. More information is good. And that's the way science should always be approached.
It should.
Yeah, that's but here's my issue. Here's my issue with the whole thing. Looking at everything scientifically, we make some huge leaps based on theories, which are nothing but supposition. I mean, there are some fact, but with almost all science, you have to fill in some blanks with some theories. You have to put some faith into something.
But now remember, theory in science is a hypothesis is a guess. A theory is a working model. So that's not saying the working model is perfect, that it can't be refined, but generally when something gets to a point like a theory of evolution, the theory of relativity, they're pretty solid working models that are, of course, open to being replaced by better models.
Would you say you have faith in your current belief system? Like you have faith in what you believe?
I have do I have faith in what I believe? Yeah, well, I think my guesses right now are correct, but that's not saying that I'm not open to new information to them.
So you're saying that everything that you currently believe could totally be 100% completely wrong?
Sure, absolutely. I think if you don't think that, you're not really doing a service to yourself. You need to always think that I might be wrong, so I want to see more.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Outside, I know in conversations that you and we've been having this conversation for 3 years now, but in conversations you've said burning bush, I need a burning bush. And we've talked about how the burning bush was not the miracle because bushes catch on fire by themselves in the desert all the time.
Right.
What was the miracle is that it didn't burn.
Well, no, it was talking to me too. That was always my.
But
I said for me to say, hey, I'm on board, and again, not doubt it so much, is to say, when I see something real supernatural myself, then yeah, I'm probably.
Well,
on board.
how do you feel about the concept of resurrection?
In what manner?
In what manner do you think that Christ? Okay, regardless of what he died for, do you think he died and then came back to life?
I don't know if he, like I said, that it's the story. There's been lots of instances where people have been pronounced dead and then, found at the morgue alive.
For 3 days after being nailed to a cross.
Well, there's been guys who got pulled out of. I mean, that's why 1800s they used to build caskets you could get out of because there was a big paranoia about being pronounced dead accidentally. So.
See,
again,
I love science. I've made a living out of it.
Right.
I've built my career on science. And it's things like this here, like you bring up Newton. You read things like this, This is about the time of the end. This is a quote by Newton. You may have read this.
Oh, a body of men will
About
be...
the time of the end, a body of men will be raised up who will turn their attention to the prophecies and insist on their literal interpretation in the midst of much clamor and opposition. Now, this is Sir Isaac Newton saying this.
Right.
And there's been other instances, and it always seems to be back, not modern day people saying this, back, before what we call technology emerged. So, what could he be talking about here? About the time of the end. What is he talking about? When he talks about prophecies, we know what this is, self-explanatory.
He actually spent more time studying the Bible than he did physics.
He wrote books about the book of Daniel. So, I don't necessarily adhere to the fact that science and, I hate the word religion, but I'll just use it because it's convenient. Science and religion are separate and opposite. I do not adhere to this whatsoever.
And you know what? I agree with that.
I think
too.
they're one and the same.
I don't think they have to be mutually exclusive.
Yeah, and you brought up when you see a miracle, I still have yet to find any kind of guess or theory or anything about consciousness. That to me is the clear miracle that you see and experience yourself every day. And where did this come from? That you're self-aware, and I adhere to the ghost in the machine theory, where this is literally a spacesuit, and what we see is actually made up of things that aren't real when you get down to the very small.
This we've talked about.
They appear because you're looking at
this
it.
table. We think it's solid.
Yeah, it's not.
But the space is actually, this is space actually.
Right.
That all you've got are maybe a few billion atoms, but really, what's an atom? It's just space. It's just a little neutron.
Yeah, it's particles
and a little particle float, and it's the electromagnetism that keeps us from putting our hand through it.
Right through it. And Chuck Missler, there's a quote by him too that kind of light bulb goes off. He says, "The more that you understand about science, the more comfortable you become with the Book of Genesis." That's a profound quote from a guy who I find extremely intelligent. I don't think anyone can. For
me, the clincher, and it's the one characteristic the Bible has that no other book in history has, and that is its ability to predict the future.
Absolutely.
Perhaps it was penned by some humans. 40-some guys writing 66 books, I think, spread out over 1,500 years. They themselves, they didn't know each other. They spoke different languages. Yet you have to bring the writings of these guys together to form one cohesive picture. Some of these guys were writing things they didn't even know how to explain, or were using the best terminology they had for these things at the time. But it's the prediction of what is going to happen. Not just, I always bring up the fact that Israel was going to be reestablished. And I just love framing it from J.C. Ryle's point of view. He's writing in 1870. And he goes, I have no idea how it's going to happen, because the Jews are the bottom of the social ladder in every society in the world. But when God says something's going to happen, I just believe him. So somehow, I don't know if it'll be my lifetime or in the future, somehow Israel's going to be a nation again. And they just laughed at him. And this was 1870. But you flash forward. We now look at it as ancient history. But it was only 78 years after he wrote that. And not that it just happened, but it's like God predicted how it would happen. It's like me predicting who's going to win the Super Bowl this year and telling you every single play in the game.
Well, and when it would happen.
And how big the stadium was. But he said that it would happen via vote. It would be voted on. It would happen within an hour. He said that a leader by the name of David would be the one to announce it. David Ben-Gurion announced it. He said that once that state's established, you still won't be able to travel to it from neighboring states. And that's true, because all of the Muslim states around it don't recognize Israel. You cannot get to Israel through Syria, Jordan, Lebanon. You've got to come in, and what did the Bible say would happen? You'd be coming in on Tarshish ships. Well, those are English, i.e., we're the spawn of England. Mystery Babylon right there. And that's the only way to get it. You either have to fly in, or sail into Haifa or some other port city. I mean, and there's so many more of them. What the design of the flag would be. Now, that one you can retroactively make come true. And that's just one prediction. There are roughly 2,000 prophecies in that book. I think roughly, depending on how you define a prophecy, we've had 1,500 or so that have happened. And we know because of the Nag Hammadi and because these are the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, Nag Hammadi was not Dead Sea Scrolls. What was the name of the dig for the Dead Sea Scrolls, which was right at the end of World War II? We basically found all of the ancient texts of what the Bible was 2,000 years ago, and we've now been able to go back and go, it has not been interfered with. A few words here and there have changed meaning. Cornerstone has become capstone,
Right.
things like that. But buried inside of those books were also other books that the Hebrews of the time, the burgeoning Christians, they held these things, closely. This was in a sense almost their life source. And it's not just the 66 books we have in our Bible. It's a lot of critical books that are not in our Bible anymore, removed at the Council of Nicaea, like the Book of Giants, the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jasher. Not just the Gnostic ones. And these
Qumran? Wadi Qumran?
Qumran, thank you. That was it. And so we now know for a fact this dig, using some of the same dating methods, so understand that there's an asterisk behind when I say that. We're looking at a document that was in circulation around the time of 70 AD. And it's incredible that just going off of that document and what it says is going to happen in the future has all happened. There are about 500 unfulfilled prophecies in that book, and they all have to do with the end time. There's a massive deception coming on the world. People think they're getting smarter, but they're getting dumber. The fallen angels are going to pull a fast one on everyone. That's what I think, the aliens are. They're not really aliens from another planet. These are just the same old demons from history. But they're going to come, and I'm sure they're going to have some great story of, no, we're the ones that put you guys here. Yeah, no, Jesus was a good guy, and so was Buddha and the sixth Mahdi, and all of these ascended masters are all good guys. And you guys are warring over all of this stuff. We're God. We created you. And the vast majority of the world is going to believe it, except for the hardcore Christians who are going to be like, oh, this is the big deception. And, of course, another prediction that's in there, not proven by the fact that we are seeing more and more news reports about injectable RFID chips, or certainly the Nazis, who are demonic. We'll get into that later. Walking around with barcodes. There is something coming where there's this big decision every single human's going to have to make. And apparently the decision is you're going to accept this mark, and it's called the Mark of the Beast. Now, when it comes, don't expect some dude with a hood and a pitchfork and horns going, hey, man, do you want to go to hell? It won't look like that. It's going to look like the greatest thing since sliced bread. So I envision...
And that chip's going to cure cancer.
There's going to be... Now, the Bible's been right on everything to now. And I'm guessing it's going to probably be right the rest of the way through. So there's going to be some massive global cataclysm. Now, even when J.C. Ryle was writing in 1870, we didn't have weapons. I mean, they're talking about weapons that can wipe out the whole world in one fell swoop. This doesn't exist even in 1870. Israel's not here in 1870. And no, people have not been predicting the end of the world forever. That began in 1948 when Israel was reestablished during a blood moon tetrad. Then the very next tetrad we had, because God said he'd put signs in the sky, the sun and moon would be used for signs. The next blood moon tetrad we have is 1967, and that's when the Jews walked into Jerusalem. First time they're now back in literally the biblical city. And the Bible is a battle between Jerusalem and Babylon. Babylon is that, Babylon is now Mystery Babylon because it went underground. And it's amazing to me that before it happened, God predicted there would be this Egyptian empire. Then there would be this Babylonian empire. Then there would be this Persian empire. Then the Greeks. Then the Romans. And then it would go silent. Satan's kingdom would go quiet. And the Romans, they were never conquered. What did the Romans do? The Roman Caesars became the popes of today. And they started to proliferate all throughout Europe. And what you have now are the kings and queens of the European Union and, by descent, the United States. They're all related to each other, and they're related to the popes. Like, you can actually go find out George. Now, at some point, we're all related, because if we all germinate from the same place, there's going to be some relation. So I don't like to talk about that one too much. But how odd that hidden Rome system that was predicted, aside from the Bible, like I've seen it, all you have to do is follow the currency. The all-seeing eye. Look at that pyramid on the back of our dollar bill, which we handed over to these, people call them these bloodline families, that you can trace their ancestry back to the days of the money changers in the temple of Jesus Christ. A lot of people don't know Jesus Christ lost his temper. He walked into that temple, and he went to the money changers' tables, and he flipped them over. He had a tantrum, and he gave a specific warning. He's like, these guys are the synagogue of Satan. They are going to be around. They're going to be hidden for a long time, and they're going to pop out right at the end, and they're going to be Jews. Well, they're going to say they're Jews, but they're actually Luciferians. They're actually Satanists. And you can actually go find that written in even the documents of, believe it or not, the United Nations. David Spangler wrote in 1970 something that no one's entering the new age without making a pledge to Lucifer, without making a Luciferian pledge. That's not a conspiracy theory. I mean, these people are, in a lot of ways, talking about, we are going to put this thing into this world under a one-world system, and it was predicted 2,000 years ago. And it's happening, like, we're getting so close to it.
Another thing, too, about, the book of Revelation. I mean, really, I remember my mom said to me, oh, honey, every generation has believed, that they're living in end times. But what I said to her was, they didn't have the technology we have today, because just 50 years ago, and I'm being generous, there were things in the book of Revelation that even the smartest people on the planet would look at it and go, this makes absolutely no sense. I can't even imagine. One example is the two witnesses, right? It says that the whole world will watch. Well, back in 1940, you're reading that going, well, how the hell is that going to, that's not even possible, right? You couldn't even imagine how that was possible. Today, everything in that book, we can explain it. We can go, oh, yeah, I could see how that would happen, satellite TV. Oh, yeah, I could see, and here we are. And this is, how many years after Israel becomes a nation? Again, all in the Bible.
There are 14 million Jews in the world. 7 million live in Israel. Roughly 7 million live in the United States, and then there's a bunch scattered in every other nation. They're 1/1000th of the Earth's population. But they're the center of news every day. The whole conflict of the whole world is centered around this small little chunk of land that has very little farming value, has very little, nothing more than it's written about being God's city. Why, of all the places, is that such a hotbed of activity? I don't know for sure, but I do know this. It was predicted that it would be. And there's so many of these predictions in there, you start to look at it and just go, wow. Like, I never really read the Bible because I just listened to too many TV shows make fun of it. And this was my crazy shift in worldview where I just suddenly realized, holy cow, this book really does predict. It talks of our past. It predicts our future. It talks about why and who all this deception would be happening, what the strategy behind it is.
Well, I think what they figured out, okay, because we are the first generation to be educated, godlessly in a completely secular environment. The Bible was removed from public schools around the time we were born.
Exactly.
And so, therefore,
1963.
everybody that went to school prior to 1963, and you have varying degrees because it was lessening and lessening, but everybody who went to school prior at least had a biblical reference, which has been taken from us. We're going to have to close on that.
No, we do.
We're going to have to, unfortunately, close on that because we're out of time. So we're going to have to bring Troy back.
I want to
finish
say one
this.
thing real quick. It says even though the Bible is 66 individual books written on 2 or possibly 3 continents in 3 different languages over a period of approximately 1,500 years by more than 40 authors, it remains one unified book from beginning to end without contradiction. That, I
Amen,
wouldn't even,
sister.
I read that, I wouldn't even need to know what's in the book. That right there is a miracle to me.
This has been Down the Rabbit Hole. The guy be the glory, great things he's done. We'll see you next week.